American troops and U.S. interests will not be tolerated. Let's bring in CBS News national security correspondent David Martin. He's at the Pentagon. And David, what are you hearing about these strikes?
Well, we are hearing from several officials that airstrikes have begun against about half a dozen different locations inside Iraq and Syria, and that these strikes include bombing runs by B-1 bombers. The B-1 is an aircraft that was originally designed to drop a nuclear weapon on the Soviet Union. It has been converted to a conventional bomber, and it is capable of carrying up to 75,000 pounds of bombs. So that's two of those planes involved in this strike. Now, the targets here are both the militias that have been conducting these attacks and the Iranian facilities and personnel who have been aiding the militias, arming and training them to conduct these attacks. The administration has done such a job of telegraphing this strike ever since Monday, when President Biden said he had decided on a response, that you have to assume that all of the personnel that the U.S. might be looking for have gone to ground, either having left the country entirely or having surrounded themselves with women and children, which is usually a pretty good safeguard against getting hit by a U.S. bomb. So we're not probably going to get the individuals this time, but there are going to be a lot of locations that are damaged or destroyed.
David, thank you. Yeah, that's using some significant air power there in order to carry out those attacks. Also want to bring in Margaret Brennan, who is our chief foreign affairs correspondent and moderator of Face the Nation. And Margaret, let's talk about that. There has been some criticism of this administration that the president telegraphed that strikes were coming. There has been some reporting that a number of these Iranian intelligence and military officials who perhaps were in Syria and Iraq assisting those militias there have already fled. What do we know about that?
That's exactly right. David put his finger on that, and sources in the region told me as much, that a lot of those IRGC Quds Force trainers have left Iraq and Syria knowing this was coming, and that is also intentional by the United States. The U.S. has not assessed that Tehran directed this attack, but President Biden did say he holds Iran responsible for providing the weapons and the assistance to the militias that did. So they are drawing a distinction there, and part of this attempt is to avoid a direct conflict with the state of Iran, instead taking on these proxy forces. And this is not the first U.S. strike. In fact, January 23rd was the last time the U.S. hit Kataib Hezbollah, the militia underneath that umbrella organization that hit the United States, and the U.S. bombed in Baghdad at the beginning of January to take out one of the leaders as well.
Can you explain why that distinction matters? Because certainly for the families of those 3 U.S. soldiers who were killed, and there was that dignified transfer for them today, there is this question, of course, well, they are funded by Iran. They are using Iranian-made weapons and supplies. They've received the training. So what difference does it make whether they specifically ordered this attack or this drone to strike? Because there were multiple other strikes on this base, and there have been 100 total strikes on our U.S. personnel in the region.
Absolutely. And to those families, it makes no difference. They lost those 3 individuals, those 3 soldiers, 2 women and 1 man. There is no explanation here or splitting of hairs on the intelligence. But for those in the Situation Room trying to decide how to hit military targets without drawing the United States into a direct conflict with the regime in Tehran, they are putting a lot on that differentiation. They are also putting a lot on the idea that you can be Iranian directed in terms of financial planning and training, but not told to carry out the attack. And they have said time and again, both officials in the region and U.S. officials, that it is getting harder and harder to actually get these militias under control, because there is no longer one powerful general like there used to be when Qasem Soleimani, the legendary general, was in control, using these proxy forces to carry out Iran's will, but hiding behind them as well by trying to avoid that direct conflict. And remember, he was taken out by by the Trump administration in a drone attack in 2020.
Right. We were just in the region, of course, and some of the criticism that has been levied by Republicans in Congress is that these have been pinprick attacks, going after infrastructure, going after weapons depots, but not going after command and control or the individuals that are carrying out or ordering these attacks or funding them.
An important point. Another one, and this was a conversation before this deadly attack on U.S. personnel, is whether President Biden will decide to keep U.S. military in the region to the extent he has them. There are about 3,400 U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria combined, and there were already talks about drawing down the 2,500 in Iraq. Does the president want to keep U.S. military personnel there when they are sometimes easy targets in these constant tit-for-tat attacks, or will he pull them out? That's under active diplomatic negotiation right now, and at U.S. embassies throughout the region, there's a heightened security alert to protect the personnel there.
CBS News reporting at this hour that these retaliatory strikes have begun in Iraq and Syria, ordered by the President of the United States. The Pentagon carrying out these attacks, according to our Pentagon correspondent David Martin, with B-1 bombers. And it comes on the very same day that the bodies of the 3 U.S. soldiers killed in Jordan, Sergeant William Rivers, Sergeant Kennedy Sanders, and Sergeant Breonna Moffett, returned to the U.S. today. We saw President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden. They were at Dover Air Force Base just today in Delaware for this dignified transfer of their remains. Want to bring in CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes. And Nancy, this is one of the most solemn tasks that a president can do.
It is, Nora, and it's only the second time that Mr. Biden, as president, has had to do it. Today, of course, he was paying his respects to these 3 soldiers who died in Jordan, 2 of whom were posthumously promoted to sergeant this week. But back in August of 2021, just about 7 months after he took office, he was at Dover welcoming home the bodies of 13 U.S. service members who were killed in that bombing at the Kabul airport in the final chaotic days of the U.S. pullout from Afghanistan. You could clearly see the anguish on the president's face there today. He was joined by the Secretary of Defense, who was using a cane after recently being hospitalized. He was there with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and with the families of these 3 victims. They were off camera. You couldn't see them, but they were seated there. And before their loved ones were taken off of that military jet in preparation for their funerals, we are told that the president had an opportunity to actually meet with those family members in a room there at Dover Air Force Base to pay his respects in person.
Nancy Cordes at the White House reporting today about the president being there for that dignified transfer. Thank you so much. Just to recap, CBS News reporting now the U.S. has begun conducting those strikes in Iraq and Syria to retaliate for that drone attack that killed 3 U.S. soldiers. David Martin saying this is a half a dozen locations in Iraq and Syria, and that the aircraft involved included 2 B-1 bombers. Our coverage will continue on CBS News, streaming your local news, and tonight right on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Nora O'Donnell in Washington.